unconstitutional because it results in wide disparities in spending between low wealth and high wealth districts. The judge also said that the inequities required not only redistribution of state aid, but also more funding overall, and we fully agree. We look forward to the governor and the legislature acting to provide a fair, adequate, and predictable funding system that enables all children to meet state academic standards and does not discriminate against low-wealth districts. At every Board of Education meeting, we hear pressing and important concerns from the public about the need to invest in our buildings, about the need for additional staff, and the need for smaller class sizes. But this testimony isn't new. In fact, we've heard it for decades. I myself testified on the steps of Harrisburg in a large rally for equitable and fair funding in the late 1990s. Then, as a high school student myself, I talked about these exact shortcomings that we are here talking about today. Like you all, I will not give up. But aren't we tired of just talking about it? There is opportunity for real change, not just talking about change. And that time is now. The current system of funding education in Pennsylvania leaves school districts like Philadelphia with the continual challenge of deciding how to invest limited resources to meet the varying needs of our students and staff. We have to constantly decide what we can't have or can't do. We don't have the luxury to simply do what we know needs to be done because the pie simply isn't large enough. According to an analysis by the Public Interest Law Center and the Education Law Center, the school district would need an additional $1.14 billion annually to meet the educational needs of our students. There is a lot we can't do because we don't have this money. If the school district were fully funded, we could invest in our priority areas of upgrading school facilities, addressing gun violence, and providing incentives to help fully staff our schools. The average age of our school buildings is 73 years old, and according to a 2017 analysis of the school district facilities, the district's deferred maintenance costs total $4.5 billion. At least 85 buildings need major renovations. This is a glaring symptom of chronic underfunding for schools for decades across the state and here in Philadelphia. In May, the Board of Education adopted a strategic plan called Accelerate Filling, which aims to provide every learner in our school district with the opportunity to achieve positive outcomes. Also, in 2021, the board established goals and guardrails. Our plan to increase student achievement has become our North Star for decision-making. It provides a framework for more governance that focuses on racial equity, setting clear expectations for what students must know and be able to do, and rigorously monitoring academic progress. And while I'm hugely encouraged by this plan as a board member, as an educator, and as a mother of a second grader here in the school district of Philadelphia, I also recognize the harsh reality of limitations to achieving these goals when you're underfunded annually by $1.14 billion. The board knows that a quality education will give our learners the tools necessary to achieve self-determination, dignity, and their fullest potential. We believe this can be done with a laser-focused and student-centered approach to education, predicated on values such as equity, accountability, safety, and respect. But we will never achieve this if we are constantly stretching limited resources. For years, for decades, our leaders in the Board of Education have joined other school districts, families, elected officials, and advocates to urge the legislature to provide a fair, adequate, and predictable funding system that enables all children to meet academic standards. And we look forward to the real change that ensures all students in both district and charter schools across the Commonwealth have access to a quality education that empowers them to learn, achieve, and reach their greatest potential. Because like you, I'm tired of just talking about this. I'm ready for change. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Guridy, a Philadelphia resident and parent. The children of our city are in crisis. Each day that goes by without equitable funding is one more day of struggling to survive, to have the ability to read and comprehend, to be able to compute and think critically. You want our children to be more productive members of our city. Educate them now. Don't continue to allow more generations of our children to succumb to the dangers of the streets. Give the them what is rightfully theirs in order for them to be prepared for the future. Do not sit back and continue to blame all current and future ills on society when you as decision makers are not ensuring that our children's schools are providing the resources that they are entitled to. Stop underfunding our schools. Los schools need resources now. Los niños de nuestra ciudad están en crisis. Cada día que pasa sin una financiación equitativa es un día más de lucha por sobrevivir. Tener capacidad de leer y comprender, ser capaz de calcular y pensar críticamente. Quieren que nuestros niños sean miembros más productivos en nuestra ciudad, tienen que educarlos ahora. No sigamos permitiendo que más generaciones de nuestros niños sucumban a los peligros de las calles. Denles lo que por derecho necesitan para que estén preparados en el futuro. No se queden sentados y sigan culpando a la sociedad de todos los males actuales y futuros cuando ustedes, como tomadores de decisiones, no se aseguran de que las escuelas de los niños reciban los recursos que tienen derecho a recibir. Déjennos de financiar insuficientemente nuestras escuelas. Las escuelas de Filadelfia necesitan recursos ahora. Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Hitchner and I'm an English ESL teacher at Building 21. This is my 14th year teaching in Philly. Last year was almost my last. And that has everything to do with decades of disinvestment and underfunding from the state. It constantly asks teachers to do more with less, and puts the safety and well-being of staff and students at risk. Last spring, our 108-year-old school was closed for asbestos exposure twice. That turbulence brought fear and uncertainty for 2.5 months. We were abruptly relocated to a new space far from home. Our families had unanswered questions about our toxic school, concerns about travel, and fears around safety and gun violence in a distant neighborhood. With family pushback, we were approved by the governor to go virtual, and we often taught with fewer students in the class and everyone else online. Student engagement, concerns about mental health, and attendance dropped, just like when COVID first started. During that process, we learned that our school community had over 2 years of asbestos exposure. This really is so underfunded and understaffed that the records of the initial discovery were lost. When it was finally deemed safe to return, we had exactly 1 day with our students before we closed again for a new asbestos issue. For the rest of our lives, we will live with the worry and possible reality of cancer and other health issues caused by prolonged exposure to asbestos. This sort of issue simply would not be tolerated in well-funded districts. They can build a safe, new, modern schools that are lead and asbestos-free with access to funding and power to galvanize and solve any facilities problem. Philly had 6 schools closed from asbestos just last year, yet our district doesn't have the resources to even catch up on inspections. The average age of our building in Philly is 73 years old. 40% of those schools do not have air conditioning. And so, after so much stress and disruption from asbestos last year, we started this year with 4 straight early release days due to heat. That is over 13 hours of instructional time melted away in the first week of school. We start and end every year with these interruptions in this learning loss. My 4th floor classroom has hit over 90 degrees even on some of those early release days before noon. Before my students start in the morning, our room has already eclipsed 85 degrees with over 50% humidity. Last week, a student with anemia was pale, dizzy, and about to pass out. Our students with health issues such as asthma or seizures face increased risk in that heat as well. No one wants to move, let alone think. This is unacceptable. And yet, these are the conditions we endure to make first impressions, build community, and set expectations for our students. These gross derelictions have led me and my students to conclude that those in power simply do not care about us. The word negligence constantly comes up, and one of my students recently said that we have to use what we have, but that's still not enough. Public schools always have to settle for less. To make matters even worse, if a student breaks a leg or has a physical disability, we cannot accommodate them in Building 21 because our old and underfunded building and district is grandfathered past the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we do not have elevators. Our gigantic back courtyard has enough room for grass sports fields, a track, basketball courts, a rain garden, and so much more. But instead, it is a sloped, gray, lifeless space filled with aged and cracking concrete that has caused students and staff to slip when playing and get hurt, including broken ribs. Rectifying dangerous facilities must be a top priority for all policymakers. each day that passes without adequate and equitable funding from the state, teachers are the ones left to fill in the gaps. We spend our own time and money to create community gardens, buy our own supplies, build school libraries in a district that went from 176 librarians to just one librarian left today. And we try our best to provide the best education we can for our students. Sadly, that's not enough, and it is not sustainable. 82% of the districts in Pennsylvania are underfunded. 82% of the districts in this state are underfunded. This is not just a Philly issue. That includes my niece and nephew in the Valley and rural, suburban, and urban districts throughout the state. My students, like all students, are more than capable. They simply need the resources and opportunities to excel. One of my students shared this week that it's important for students to feel seen, and that cannot happen without funding. I've heard people question, why should we throw our money at failing schools? That's false, and they are wrong. The truth is, we don't have failing schools, we have failing legislatures. And the court, Constitution, and their constituents demand better. How much longer must we wait? Give us what we deserve, what we need, and what is constitutionally mandated. We need to get this right with purpose, urgency, and equity for all students across the Commonwealth. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sylvia Witherspoon, and I'm from Power Inner Peace. I want to start off by giving you guys a timeline about how long we've been in this fight. I started in Power when my son was 8 years old. I started on the education team. We traveled to Harrisburg. My son and I made speeches in order to get this fair funding. My son is now in college. It's been a 10-year fight to get this money. I'm also a former social worker in Philadelphia. I know why they call Philadelphia a trauma town. One of the worst things that you can see and not have the resources to fix in these public schools is to see a child murder. The gun violence in Philadelphia has made our children full of fear, full of depression. They have to watch their families and friends be killed and still have to go to school, expected to sit there, to learn, to not concentrate, and they can't concentrate while this is going on. The parents don't have the resources. The teachers don't have the resources. It's so important that we get the $6.2 billion so that we can get the help and the resources for our kids. They cannot learn under that kind of stress. It is unfair to expect these children to meet these state standards, and they're looking at them and saying, it's something wrong with our children because they can't meet state standards. Not true. You didn't give them the resources to meet it.
Exactly.
You didn't give them the money to meet it.
That's right.
You know, they had determined that our funding was unconstitutional. They had determined that all children can learn, and they can. We all know some little child or some child that had asked us all the questions that we can't answer. So they want to know, they want to learn. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I should have spoken because it makes me angry.
No.
It's almost they are acting on the bigotry of low expectations. When they look at our skin color, or they look where we live and we're poor. No child should be determined whether or not he gets an education or not based on the color of their skin or where they live or how much money their family makes. Pennsylvania has the money. Pennsylvania has a slow
They do.
Give it to our children and start educating them.
That's right. of the many attorneys for the petitioners in the school funding case.
Okay.
So we now have a final judgment from the courts that Pennsylvania's system of funding its public schools is unconstitutional because it provides inadequate resources to low-wealth school districts, so they cannot provide an effective educational opportunity to their students, and is unconstitutional because the funding is inequitable, discriminating against low-wealth districts like Philadelphia. This is something students, teachers, parents in Philadelphia have known for a very long time. But now, legislators can no longer deny these basic facts. For far too long, Harrisburg has not been doing its job of finding the funding which schools like Philadelphia needs so they can have the facilities, the technology, the teachers, and all the other staff necessary. So now is the time. The first job in funding schools to actually find out how much they need, something the state has not even attempted to do or to ask since 2011. So on Tuesday, Professor Matt Kelly submitted a report to the Basic Education Funding Commission that Philadelphia should have now no longer $1.14 billion, but $1.5 billion. Yes, $1.5 billion more, and statewide schools need $6.3 billion in order to provide sufficient basic and special education funding to all their students. Funding at this level, which is funding at the same level as successful schools in Pennsylvania are already spending, will transform the quality of education in Philadelphia and the other underfunded districts. So now is the time for the Commission to develop a plan to provide this money over the next few years in a timely manner, starting in the next budget. And now is the time to end giving black and brown students in Philadelphia, Chester, William Penn, Allentown, Reading, and other towns throughout Pennsylvania so much less than their neighbors receive and so much less than they need. The governor and legislators in Harrisburg cannot ignore the court's findings and its order to end this unconstitutional funding, which is denying so many children the education they deserve. So now is the time to provide Philadelphia students the funding they need. Now is the time to act. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Deborah Klehr. I'm the Executive Director of the Education Law Center and one of the lawyers.
Take off your sunglasses.
Detailed and historic 786-page decision in February, court ruled for the first time the education clause guarantees every child access to a quality public education, and the way Pennsylvania funds public schools is unconstitutional, and that education is a fundamental right. The ruling details resource disparities, confirming that the system discriminates against students in low-wealth school districts. The court found that every student is entitled to a meaningful opportunity to succeed academically, socially, and civically, which requires that all students have access to a comprehensive, effective, and contemporary system of public education. This week, the Basic Education Funding Commission began public hearings and a process that will result in recommendations to the governor for a new school funding system. This is an historic opportunity to right the wrongs of the past and create a system that will transform students' lives. To comply with the judge's decision, the commission will come up with a plan to achieve adequacy and equity for all students. The plan will have to identify the total cost to ensure all students have the resources they need to succeed, adequate funding for basic education, special education, pre-K, facilities, map out a timeline for getting that needed funding to schools. It will also have to ensure that the funding is targeted to school districts that have the largest gaps between what they need and the resources they have. We know that the deepest shortfalls are in the state's lowest wealth districts, and those are the same districts where many of the state's black and brown students attend. Earlier this week, we heard testimony from school funding expert Dr. Matthew Kelly. His analysis concluded $6.3 billion additional dollars are needed to bring school funding into constitutional compliance, and the adequacy gap in Philadelphia is more than $1.5 billion. That's a shortfall of about $8,000 per student. Yesterday, the commission heard from superintendents who are petitioners in the lawsuit and from my attorney colleagues. They made clear the urgency of the situation in our underfunded schools. They reminded the commission that we are prepared to go back to court to enforce the ruling if the commission fails to do its job. This is a historic moment. The court has said our school funding system is unconstitutional. The Basic Education Funding Commission offers a real opportunity to finally address the Commonwealth's highly inequitable school funding system and give all children a better chance for success. The challenges we face here in Philly are faced by families in so many underfunded districts because of years of neglect from the state. As my colleague Maura McInerney said in her testimony yesterday, the court decision has given us a clear path forward to achieve equity and vastly improve academic and life outcomes for all children. The time to blaze that trail is now.
Good afternoon, State Senator Vincent, Democratic Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, representing the 7th Senatorial District, and a 100% supporter of this coalition. On February 7th, all the time. February 7th, a historic day. A day which will go down in the annals of the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the history of this nation. President Judge of Commonwealth Court. President Judge of Commonwealth Court said the way that the state of Pennsylvania funds basic education is unconstitutional and inadequate. Unconstitutional and inadequate. And for all my teachers in the room, I'm going to say it 3 times so it sinks in. Unconstitutional and inadequate. And that we must fix it. Immediately. Not in some day and time, long ways away, but immediately. We've waited too long. Fix it. We have waited too long. Generations have suffered by this tedious way of how this state funds education. The young lady just stood up, talked about her son. There's thousands, not hundreds of thousands of children who started school at kindergarten in an unconstitutional and an inadequately funded school, and by the time they got to 12th grade, it's still unconstitutional and it's still inadequate, and most likely that child or those children were caught up in school that were lead infested, asbestos infested, air conditioning none, heat none, and teachers and school employees were caught up in those same buildings, not given the opportunity to do their job, to serve the children and to serve the broader community. Remember that. An educated child is a child that makes all of us better, makes our community better, makes this Commonwealth better, makes this nation better. So some are fearful of the number that the professor put out on Tuesday of $6.2 billion. Don't be fearful of that, because the truth of the matter, it's larger than that. Because that $6.2 billion did not include special education. That $6.2 billion did not include school construction. So the number really is larger. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be fearful of that. Because justice must always stand up to fear. We cannot walk away from the numbers, because the real deal is what has been the cause of not educating adequately and constitutionally. How many thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost because there wasn't a constitutional and an adequately funded school to take care of the dreams of that child? How many? How much, if we want to put it in economic terms, how much money has been lost because we could not invest the services and the skills that these children have so that they could be full contributors to society and change everything about us? I would remind you, to the young lady who's now at Harvard University, who just graduated from Paul Robeson High School in West Philadelphia, I would remind you the first African-American astronaut, Guy Bluford, graduated from a Philadelphia public school, and there's so many more stories. What's been lost? That's the real cost we need to get an understanding of. And so we're here to hear from the city of Philadelphia, the school district of Philadelphia, and those involved here about what has happened here. And somebody asked me on the first day of school, or actually it was around the end of the first week of school, what do you think about the Basic Education Funding Commission here? Well, I told them this. The perfect story, the heartbreaking but perfect story, is what happened the first week of school, when 84 school buildings had to shut down because they did not have the proper air conditioning and ventilation. What better story do you need? What better story do you need? That's not just 84 buildings shutting down. That's 84 schools with hundreds, if not thousands of students who lost the opportunity to learn that they will never get back. So we are here to hear more testimony. But the testimony is going to be the obvious, what we know, but we must go through this process. We're asking people to speak out, to speak up, to go online, to go on social media. Tell your story. Tell what you know. Tell the hell that you've gone through. Talk about the bright lights that have been shut down. Do you remember Dean Pagan? Do you remember Dean? Churchill, I know you remember Dean. The little boy who was eating the lead paint chips off his desk. Tell those stories so that the world can hear of this injustice and how we must right this. We must get this right. It is on us. Either we rise to the occasion and get this done, or we have failed miserably and have lost the fight, the opportunity to turn the light on and to turn the truth on and give the children and those who are responsible for taking care of them their opportunity, their brightness, their moment to transform us all. I will tell you this. Every time you see a gun violence victim across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I can bet they come out of a school that was unconstitutionally and inadequately funded.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So don't think there's a separation.
Yes.
Don't think there's a difference between what happens out there and what happens in the school building. There is a direct correlation. It's our moment. And the question is, will we rise to the occasion?
Yes.
Will we rise to the occasion?
Yes.
We will. Will we rise to the occasion?
Yes,
we
will.
will.
We will rise.
Tell the story, people. Tell the story. Thank you.
every child in Pennsylvania deserves a quality education in their own neighborhood. And that's what the Basic Education Funding Commission has the power to do today. But if you picture a map of Pennsylvania, it's like a checkerboard of school districts that have a lot of funding, a lot of resources, right next to school districts that are lacking for basic things. They're lacking for things like enough bathrooms, enough teachers, and enough safe walls without asbestos in them, with air conditioning. Right now, Pennsylvania students are experiencing trauma and poor mental health at levels that are even higher than before the pandemic, and it was bad then. Right now, 44% of Pennsylvania high school students said that they felt sad or hopeless almost every day in 2021, and that's up 9 percentage points since before the pandemic. And for our young people who live in underfunded school districts, when they feel sad or hopeless, there are often not any counselors to support them with their mental health. There are not libraries to provide them with books or culturally relevant resources to turn to. Sometimes there's not even a safe building for them to walk into. When it comes to student trauma, a well-funded education is part of the solution. It is the prevention. Investing in schools is how we show our young people that we value them. Our state has underfunded our schools for far too long, and that's why the funding shortfalls that you keep hearing today are very large. You've heard these numbers today. The recent analysis by Matt Kelly out of Penn State said that Philadelphia needs almost $8,000 more per student this year just to be able to provide an adequate education. And our entire state's funding system is underfunded by $6.2 billion. These numbers are shocking. Don't get too used to them. These are not normal numbers. These are the results of decades of underfunding at the state level. But this problem was created by people, and it is solvable by people, by our leaders. If our lawmakers will come together and come up with a solid plan. So to the Basic Education Funding Commission, this group of lawmakers who are gathering inside right now, I ask of you 4 things as you build your plan. First, create specific funding targets for each school district. When we talk about school funding, we need to use real numbers so that we can measure progress. Number 2, make sure that those numbers